Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jasched. I am your host, Jess Jasch, and first solo episode back of the year of 2026. And I actually needed to kind of take a deep inhale, deep breath in, because the world keeps welding. And with that, I wanted to actually bring in a topic we have kind of spoken about in different ways, but not in this direct sense. And that is, today we'll be talking about the emotional economy of leadership. So we have spoken about, burnout and overwhelm, and in those kinds of episodes, in those kinds of topics, we've covered why that can happen with leaders, but I really wanted to address it head on, that leadership today, as we know, we here at least know, it's not just strategic, it is emotional, because we are human and we are operating in a very, very human way, and that is really important. But most leaders I work with, they're not necessarily tired from their decisions. They're not necessarily tired from doing their job. Sometimes a lot of their fatigue comes from holding or managing people in a way that is not sustainable or regenerative, but definitely not sustainable. So when leadership operates in an emotional economy, because we are in an emotional human being body, we can step into overspending without realizing it, especially, and this is really, really important, especially when we look at or bring into the fact that, as I said, the world keeps welding, and this is not new in the sense of there's always things going on in the world and other people's lives that we don't know necessarily, or that might be someone else's experience that isn't ours. But there is a particular loudness about it at the moment, and there is a particular concern about it at the moment, and stress about it at the moment, when we see history repeating in ways that we were all taught not to repeat, when we see large groups of people being harmed, large ethnic groups of people being harmed just for existing. There's so much happening, and there is a lot of blatant tyranny that is in our face, like never before, but also a lot more condensed in a lot more condensed time frames than never before as well. That does make it feel like we are holding a lot more than what we might normally be in our own lives, as well as holding our positions at work in leadership, as well as holding our personal relationships, our families, and all of that, right? So this is what I mean by the human experience. We we will serve ourselves, but also serve others better when we at least acknowledge that we are having that human experience. I can't make it all go away. This episode is not going to fix everything. It might not even, quote, fix anything other than giving you the recognition of what might be going on for you that isn't just the obvious, well, I'm showing up to work and all of this. And then we also have our whole personal life experiences that might be going on, and in 2025, I think I did an episode late in the year about this, because in 2025, it is wild to me how many people I spoke to almost every single person I spoke to was having a wild 2025 personally, and not always in the best or most comfortable ways. So we are coming into a new year. We've come into a new year where some of these other worldly things are still happening, or new and worse things are happening now, as well as the existing things. Or we may be in recovery mode personally from whatever that was. You know, there's a lot. So we need to get real first with the idea that leadership is emotional. And if you haven't been operating that way, I would posit you are largely ignoring yourself in that process. Leadership is emotional, and also we are whole human beings having whole experiences. So this episode is for, as usual, the leaders, people leaders, founders, business owners, HR, anyone who's become the safe person at work. There's no real title required for you to get something out of this episode, but just being aware of it, because it is the reality of it and it is an important part of leadership, but we also need to have the real gritty conversations about it as well. And before we can even step into improving our leadership and doing better or allowing ourselves to grow in that way, we have to actually name what's actually happening, like with anything. So emotional labor is really about how you must manage emotions as a part of your role. And we're not demonizing emotional labor. There are definitely negative facets to it, but it also is not necessarily the problem either. But we're literally just talking about exactly what it is. So it's managing your emotion as part of your role. And it's no longer just service roles. It's no longer just, hospitality workers who usually do an incredible job of showing up and serving regardless of what might be going on, showing up and giving people a good experience. It could be healthcare workers who forever have always shown up and done their job and done it incredibly in most cases, regardless of the stresses on and demand on them. But it's no longer just these kinds of service roles. It is leadership in the way we are stepping into leadership, which is important. So in leadership, we try to stay calm even if we're not. We are in the position of absorbing team anxiety. We are asked, in some cases, most cases, to be emotionally available on demand, right? So there is just the reality of what leadership is, which is why I talk about it so often, because it's not just you are good at this particular craft or skill, so now you're in a leadership position. It can't just be that, because we need to upskill all of these other things that are about emotional intelligence and regulation and how we support ourselves so that we can actually support others in our role, in our capacity, to the best of our ability. So there is a difference between, the surface acting, the putting on the face, compartmentalizing, the I'm putting on my game face and I'm going forward and I'm doing this, as well as the deep acting, which is aligning your feelings to the role, the circumstance, the situation. And yes, there are going to be times where you have to do one or the other. Neither is better or worse, but we need to use them appropriately as well. But again, as I said, when it comes to emotional labor, that is not what the problem is. It's the unacknowledged emotional labor that is. That's what gets costly. Personally, as well as, sure, financially, but the unacknowledged emotional labor is what gets costly. Ask any stay-at-home parent about this, because they will be able to tell you when emotional labor, or for example, household labor, is left unacknowledged and not valued, that is where it becomes a problem. that is where it becomes a problem in the interactions of the people who are involved. So this can hit some leaders harder than others, and there's no blame or shame here. And it doesn't mean that people who get hit hard by it are inappropriate for leadership, but it could come down to systemic reasons why emotional labor is unevenly distributed. So we know that emotional labor is more likely carried, and I'm saying more likely, I'm not saying absolutely, don't come at me. I'm saying just more likely, because we know more likely emotional labor is more likely carried by women, neurodivergent leaders who in particular are masking, and people in caring or caretaker or values-led type roles. So this emotional labor is often praised as, oh, you're so supportive, or oh, you're great with people, or oh, we can always lean on you, oh, you're our rock, oh, this. And all of these are beautiful things, right? All of these are beautiful things, but unfortunately they are rarely protected or resourced appropriately to the labor that is put in. And there's a connection to burnout research here, because again, we've spoken previously about emotional exhaustion is one of, or the most common form of burnout, and it's a core aspect of burnout. And it's not through lack of caring, and it's not through lack of wanting to care, but it is often from this constant emotional output without the recovery, without the emphasis on the recovery, without the recognition of the labor that has gone in. And this is not going into, has to be tit for tat and all of that, but it just needs to be recognized in some meaningful way. And this is where empathy can get misunderstood in massive ways as well. So empathy, God, I have so much to say about empathy, because we live in an online world where people will talk about things the way they talk about them, and we see posts about people sharing stories of, hey, I reached out to a friend and then I got accused of trauma dumping, there's a lot wrong. But empathy in itself cannot be emotional self-sacrifice. That's probably more martyrdom, which isn't useful for fucking anyone. But empathy cannot be suffering just because other people are suffering. There is a distinction here. Please listen very carefully. There is a distinction here. I'm going to use, it's not a benign example at all, but it's not a current example at least, because there's too many current examples that are just hot fucking button. And I am not interested in going into a debate about whether we should have empathy for other people or not. My clear stance is we should. Morally, ethically, regardless of whether a law says we should or not, we should have fucking empathy for other people. Anyway, it's a hot button topic in me as well. But I remember it was the bushfires a few years ago in the summer of 2019 leading into 2020. I think it was the Black Summer bushfires, we call it. And they were in Victoria, New South Wales, so south of my state in Queensland. And they were horrific. They were awful. And social media, for all its faults, and also in the same breath, the drain it has when it is a 24-hour news cycle, and when we do just get confronted with images constantly that is dangerous to our health and well-being, for all of that issue, at the same time, it is really useful for helping us to understand what is actually going on and really understand the gravity of some situations. And these bushfires were horrific, as most bushfires are. They were awful to watch, and there were some videos that just really made it really hard. And it's not to say that, you know, oh, it was so hard for me from my safe home, from where I was, to watch people go through this awful thing. You know, it's all well and good for me to say this, but to get to my point, which I promise I'm getting to eventually, is some of them were really, really hard. So it was really rough. And then local businesses and social media kind of kicked in, and there was, in some areas, in some corners, there was this call of not just people saying, you know, it feels really weird to be going to work when all of this awful, horrible thing is happening to our fellow Australians. You know, even though I'm safe here, it's really awful to see all of this happening. And it's, you know, which is a totally valid experience, right? There's a lot even now that's like, this feels weird, but also we live in a reality where we still need to function. And what that leads me to is, some people thought empathy, and I remember getting really clear in it myself because of this. Some people thought empathy was, well, I can't post anything about selling anything or promoting anything about my business, even though I'm really safe where I am. I can't do that, and I'm going to judge other people for doing that because other people are suffering and going through this awful experience. And while I understand the intention was to go, you know what, I'm feeling for these people, and yes, it does feel weird and it does feel off, and it's just a lot going on right now. What that approach does is it actually shames people into putting themselves in a worse position when they're not actually, I mean, on a literal sense, they're not actually literally, physically, or financially affected otherwise. So when they are not literally in physical danger, which means their livelihoods aren't in direct danger either, because they're still able to go to work or whatever, go to their job or do their business or whatever it is, there was this co-opting of the trauma that other people who were in direct danger were going through. And I'm sure it was from a well-meaning place, but that is not empathy, because to show empathy, we don't need to actually experience or try to place the experience of someone else onto us. That's not empathy. That's not useful, but that's not empathy. And I remember being clear of like, well, I actually can't help financially if I'm not continuing to promote things I have going on in my business for clients or for potential clients. It actually puts me in a worse position to contribute and to help the people who are actually affected, whose lives were actually affected. So that gentle rant about empathy went a little longer than I planned just now, but I really think it's important to really understand what empathy is and what it is not. And it is not absorbing everyone else's emotions. It is not fixing discomfort. It is not being endlessly available. The difference is empathy versus emotional contagion. And when leaders over-identify emotionally, the quality in their decision-making drops, resentment can build, boundaries blur, they actually destabilize themselves, which means they're not able to help or support in meaningful ways either. So that bushfire example and being perfectly safe and not promoting anything, which means that I wouldn't be able to financially contribute to help support people, is over-identifying. Even though I can still feel for them and feel sad watching them, I can still do that end. It actually, it's very much like the oxygen mask on a plane. If you are so busy trying to just be like, well, you're suffering and you're suffering and you're suffering. I'm going to suffer along with you, even though I can't breathe. Eventually you stop being able to actually help anyone else. We know this. So it's a really hard habit to get out of, because it comes with, from some corners of the world, it comes with shaming or blaming or guilting, and all of these things that aren't actually useful and aren't actually based in a truth. So you can care deeply, you do not have to carry everything. And I mean in a leadership sense, unless, let me pay attention to the loud voice that just spoke up in my mind, unless you're in a position to actually help and change something, unless it is your literal job to carry that. And I mean politicians, literal public service members, people who serve the public, whose job it is to serve the public. There is a difference there. So we're just acknowledging that as well, because the world is complicated right now. But we're talking about leadership just in regular everyday business. So what actually helps leaders do emotion regulation and empathy well? Because it's much more not just sustainable, but also regenerative. So I am obviously a fan of wellbeing science, because I don't know if you can be a fan of it. Because it's all research based and facts, but I'm a fan of it. Let's go with that. But we look to emotion regulation as a leadership skill. We look to not suppressing our emotions, because that has been done for far too long as well. We're not suppressing, we're not pretending we are emotionless, we're not pretending we're robots, because none of us are. And the more we stop pretending we are, bros, the better off society will be. Okay, so we're not suppressing, we're choosing how we manage it and how we respond to it. So we introduce awareness before we react, paying attention, being mindful, being aware. We assess our capacity to actually handle things without extra support or needing extra support. So we become aware of that, and we differentiate ourselves from others so that we can actually support. And this is so that we can support guys, politicians, anyone who doesn't care about anyone else's experience but their own. We differentiate enough so that we're not weighed down by someone else's experience that is their own, but it's so that we can actually support and hold strong for them. We need that second piece. So it's not about leaders needing to feel less emotion or feel less at all. They just need to regulate better. It's a skill we work on. That is why I'm harping on this constantly, because it actually makes your life easier. So you are pausing before you're responding. You are naming limits without shutting down. You're going, you know what? I'm going to have more capacity in 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes. If that's what it is, right? Like, you're naming your limits without shutting down and not explaining shit. You are choosing when to engage emotionally and when to just engage very practically. There's a moment for both. When leaders don't have these skills, and we know that many leaders in the public eye don't have these skills, we also know a lot of leaders who are becoming more in the public eye do have these skills, right? So it is improving, but they could be doing better. But when they don't have these skills, something very predictable happens. When the cost of unchecked emotional leadership, and I mean unchecked, emotional leadership is important, but unchecked, leaders can become an emotional dumping ground. They can become the unofficial therapist, the conflict absorber, the person who is still expected to perform in their role but has to keep stopping to spend emotional energy on being a therapist to someone else, and then expected to switch right back. It's a lot. Over time, this can lead to compassion fatigue, quiet resentment or loud resentment, disengagement, avoidance, all of these things. Again, a lot of this is in the role of leadership, in the sense of supporting your team. We're not saying you don't support your team anymore. We are saying this is your inner work to do. It's not a personal failing, it's just a systems issue. That is why we are talking about it. So organizations themselves benefit from emotional labor, but the systems are often rarely designed for sustainable or regenerative aspects to support that. So we need to lead without heart. Let me rephrase that. We need to lead with heart without burning ourselves out. That is the goal. So healthy emotional leadership looks like leadership maturity. So it looks like, yes, boundaries, but with reason, self-respect, energy management, energy awareness. Sustainable empathy is reminding yourself, I can listen without fixing, I can support without absorbing, I can provide options without it becoming my emotional load, even if I care. I can care without over-functioning. Both of these have to exist at once. And yet I fear, even listening, people are going to hear the pendulum and think that it's, well, I just need to stop caring. Absolutely fucking not. That's not what we're saying. So you're not rescuing as a leader, you are regulating and responding and empowering others as well. This is the personal change in leadership, but also what contributes to cultural change. So emotional labor, in order to improve all of this, emotional labor needs to be named and acknowledged. It needs to be shared. It needs to be supported. And leaders need to model that movement forward. They need to model boundaries and expectations. The emotional distribution, the emotional responsibility needs to be distributed well. Well-being isn't carried just by one person. It is not okay, and it is not enough to have just one person who is, quote, interested in well-being be the carrier of the whole entire well-being effort, even if that's the person's role is their, chief well-being officer or whatever the title is. That role is there to guide and direct for improvement in well-being, but it's not enough, and it's not okay to expect them to be in charge of the well-being of every other person, every other team, when no one else is doing the work for themselves or for their team. So it's just more intentional leadership. It's more intentional, which is the whole point. So for yourself, consider, so we're not on the pendulum swinging from one end to the other, one extreme to the other. We're really finding that balance. So consider, ask yourself, where am I spending emotional energy unconsciously? What emotional labor do I do that no one sees? What would leading with empathy and self-respect look like? It's not about, with emotional intelligence and with this emotional awareness, when it's not about giving more or giving less, it's about being wise with it. It is your job to be wise with it. It's definitely not about giving less. But how do you give? So sit with this. I invite you to sit with this and really consider. And consider also, just because it is important, consider where it where it comes up with you backing away and not actually showing up to that responsibility either, because we still have a responsibility as leaders for this work. But it's how do we do it? Because we see people in leadership positions burn out from empathy. I'm currently reading Jacinda Ardern's book, A Different Kind of Power. She was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I really loved her approach because she led with empathy. But in the book, I haven't finished it yet, but she's sharing about how it also made things harder, so she had to find a way. So we have to find a way so that it's not just this load on people that is just suddenly expected without the systemic support. This is why it's so important. We need systemic support, not just individual work, but it is individual work too. And as leaders, you are more in authority to change the systems or to affect the systems at least. So it needs to be a systemic approach as well. But that happens from the top down, from leadership. Everyone contributes systemically, but a fish rots or swims from the head. So really consider this. If you are wanting real support with that, whether for yourself individually or for your organization or for your team, that is exactly the work I do. So please reach out. You can email me at jess@j-leigh.com.au, and we can set up a time to explore what those options are and what that looks like for your circumstance. This is the work I do because it's so important. And if you resonated to any of this, this is why I do it, because people want to be better leaders, but they're burning out and they don't know how. And that's understandable because it's a whole new skill set. And other people want to be better leaders, but they don't understand why this plays a role. And it truly, truly does. So I also help with that too. But that's all I've got for you today. Until next time, just sit with this and consider it and let it serve you well.